In this video, we're going to learn how to make a pivot table in Excel. Make sure you watch till the end, as I'll be sharing some of my favorite tips to become an expert in pivot tables. If you'd like to follow along, I've included a link to this Excel file down below in the description. Let's suppose we're analyzing data for an electronics retailer, and we have all these orders that we fulfilled in 2024. For every order, we have some information about the customer, like their name, age, and country, and some information about the product that they ordered, like the name of the product and the quantity sold, as well as the sales we generated from that order and the cost associated with each order. We would like to be able to answer the following questions. What is our best-selling product? During which quarter did we get the most sales? Which country and which age group are generating the most sales for us? To answer these questions, we need to create a pivot table. First, let's insert the data in a table by going in Insert, click on Table, and press OK. Then we can go to Insert, click on Pivot Table, and we can keep the default settings to create the pivot table in a new worksheet, and a new tab will be created where we will start building our pivot table. On the left here is where our pivot table will appear, and on the right, we have the window where we will start building the pivot table. The section on the right is divided in two sections. The first section here contains all the headers from our original table. The second section is divided in 4 squares where we can drag and drop the headers from our first section to create the pivot table. Let's start building our first pivot table to analyze our total sales for the year. If we want to see the total sales, we can drag and drop the total sale from the top section to the values section at the bottom, and we get the total sales here for all our orders. If we want to see the breakdown by item name, we can simply drag and drop the item name in the rows section, and we get the breakdown of the sales by item name in our pivot table. Similarly, we could have dropped the item name in the column section like this. It's just a matter of preference. It looks a bit cleaner in row format, so let's put it back in the rows for now. Now it's a bit difficult to see what our best performing product is, so let's sort the table to have the item with the most sales in first position by clicking on the column, then right-click and selecting Sort Largest to Smallest. And we can now see that the smartphone is our best-selling product. If we want to see the number of units sold for each item, we can drag the quantity sold in the values section, and it will get added to our analysis. If we don't want to see the quantity sold anymore, we can remove it from our pivot table by dragging it back to the section at the top. Now, if we want to know what our best-selling month is, we can remove the item name from the analysis and drag the date sold in the rows section. We can see in the rows section that Excel divided the date sold into months and days, which means that when we click on the plus icon next to each month, we can see the exact date of the sale. Now, let's say we want to see the summary by quarter instead of by month. To do that, we can right-click on the table, select Group, remove the days and the months, and click on Quarters and press OK. Now we can see the breakdown by quarter, and we can see that quarter 1 was our best performing quarter. As a side point, if the field window on the right disappears from our screen, we can simply click on our pivot table and the window will appear again. Now let's say we want to see the breakdown of the different product sales by quarter. We can go ahead and drag the item name in the column, and now we can see the breakdown of each item by quarter. We can switch the item name in the rows section and the dates in the column section if we prefer to see the progression throughout time from left to right. Now, to get the best-selling country, we can remove the item name and date and put the customer country In the rows field, sort from largest to smallest, and we can see that the USA is where we made the most sales, followed by Germany and Australia. Lastly, we want to know the best-selling age group. Let's remove the customer country from our rows and add the customer age. We get all the ages here, which makes it difficult to analyze and draw conclusions. This is a perfect example where we can use the group function to show age groups instead of all the individual ages. We can right-click on the column and select Group. Here Excel is going to give us the starting and ending ages in our data, which is 18 years old and 70 years old. Excel is recommending that we make groups of 10 years, but let's change that to 15 so that we have fewer groups, and then we can press OK. Now we can see that most of our sales come from customers aged 48 to 62, with the customers aged 18 to 32 being our worst performing category. We can derive even more insight by adding the item name field in the columns to see if there is a particular item that performs well with one age group and not another. We can see that laptop sales are very popular among the older customers and not so much for the younger customers, and that smartphone sales are pretty consistent across all the age groups. If we want to better visualize this, we can insert a chart by going in Pivot Table Analyze and inserting a pivot chart. Let's select the default option, which is the clustered column, and press OK. This pivot chart will reflect the data we have in our pivot table, and it will update as we modify the fields in our analysis. For example, if we remove the age from our pivot table, then our chart will update accordingly and only show the sales by item name. If we add the dates to our pivot table, then we can see that the chart will reflect the item sales by quarter. There is one section in our pivot table that we haven't used yet, and that is the filter. So let's try it out by dragging and dropping the item name in the filter section. We can notice above our pivot table that we get this dropdown where we can select which data we want to include in our analysis. First, we want to click on Select Multiple Items, and then we can filter the data based on the item name. If we select only camera, then we get the sales for camera only in the table and in the graph. We can also select multiple items, and the data will update automatically. And we can select all the items as well, and it would be as if we didn't have a filter. As another example, let's put the date in the filter and the item name in the rows. Now we have the sales breakdown by product, and we can filter by date. So if we only want to see the sales for the first quarter, we can go in our filter and only select quarter 1. If we want multiple quarters, we can select multiple items, and the data will update automatically. Another alternative for filtering by date is to insert a timeline, so we can remove the date filter, then go in Pivot Table Analyze and click on Insert Timeline. We can check the box for date sold and click OK. And this works exactly like the filter. We can make it bigger, and here we can select the months we want to see in our analysis by dragging the ends of the timeline like this. Alternatively, we can filter by years, quarters, or days by using this dropdown. Another useful filtering tool for pivot tables is the slicer. If we go to Pivot Table Analyze, next to the Insert Timeline, we can click on the Insert Slicer icon. Let's say we want to see the product sale for the different age groups. So let's select Customer Age and click OK. And we get this slicer, which also works the same way as a filter. Here we have all the customer ages that we grouped earlier in the video. Right now, all the age groups are selected, but we can click on the different age groups to filter by age group, and our data and chart will update accordingly. To select multiple options, we need to click on this icon, and then we can select multiple age groups at the same time. In this entire video, we've been dealing with the product sales, which only considers the revenue of the orders. However, if we want a complete analysis of our electronics shop, we need to see if we're making a profit. If we go back in our data, we can see that we have the sales and the cost for each order, but we don't have the profit, which is the sales minus the cost. Instead of adding a profit column to the data, we can simply go to our pivot table, and in Pivot Table Analyze, we can click on Field Items and Sets, and then click on Calculated Field. This is where we will be able to create our profit for each order. Here we can type profit for the name of the field, and in the formula bar, we want to double-click on total sale, then hit the minus, and double-click on total cost, then hit Add, and click OK. Now we have our profit that was created, and we can see that we have a positive total profit, which means that our store is profitable. Now let's say it's the year 2025, and we have new data that we want to add. So we can go back to our Data tab and add a new order on January 1st, 2025. And we can copy the data from the previous order and change the order ID to order 101. If we go back to our pivot table and we put the date in the row section, we currently don't see the year in our pivot table because we had removed it from our grouping. So let's right-click and select Group to include the year in our dates. So we can click on Year to add it to our pivot table and click OK. And surprisingly, the 2025 order is not appearing in our pivot table. That is because every time we change or add something to our data, we need to go in Pivot Table Analyze and click on the refresh icon. Now we can see that our new order in 2025 is appearing in our pivot table. And that wraps up our pivot table tutorial. You now know all the tools to analyze a dataset with pivot tables. Thanks for watching, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more tutorials like this one.